Hey, welcome to the Dan Parsons Show. We're delighted that you could join us. And joining us in just a moment, friend of the pod, State Senator Danielle Conrad will join us in just a moment. But just a couple of reminders before we get started. Please follow us and like us on the socials. You can find us on the Facebook, the Twitter, known as X now, Instagram, LinkedIn, even TikTok. So find us on those. We'd love to hear from you and interact with you on there. Also, go to the danparsonsshow.com where you can become a friend of Dan on Patreon, which means not only you have bragging rights of being my friend, I don't know how important that is, but you get a special VIP perks such as invites to a live event that we'll be doing later on and video episodes of the pod. So please check that out. And also you can learn how to become an advertiser on the show. Well, it is my delight to introduce State Senator Danielle Conrad from the Lincoln's Fighting 46. Senator Conrad, welcome to the new Dan Parsons Show.
Hey, hi. Thank you so much for having me on, Dan, and warmest congratulations with launching the podcast. It is really exciting that Nebraskans and beyond will have the opportunity to hear your brand of public discourse, which I think is so sorely missing in this highly polarized moment that we find ourselves in politically. So I know I'm really excited to continue the conversation with you. And I know a lot of Nebraskans are really excited that you're continuing to provide a forum to thought leaders and community members to talk about what's happening locally or on the state level and to weigh in on some of the important issues that are before us and not be constrained by some sort of artificial silo about who we invite on, what issues we talk about, but really ensuring that we have a public forum for all different kinds of ideas to come and be generated and be provocative to our fellow citizens so that they can start to think about where they come down individually on some of these important issues and what kind of community and what kind of state they want us to have here in Lincoln or here in Nebraska.
Well, you're very kind, Senator. And I think most of our listeners, the folks that have followed us, even clear back to Pints and Politics days, but the radio show, whenever I would take little surveys or put something up on social media, you rate very high as a popular guest on the pod and on the radio show. So thanks for continuing the tradition. And so it's very much appreciated because, as you say, Senator, yes, this is different. I don't do a lot of yelling. I don't do a lot of shouting, at least not in a negative way. You know, our motto of lifting up instead of tearing down. You fit that profile very well. And I've told you for years how much I appreciate your willingness to reach across party lines and build coalitions and really look out for the people over politics. And so anyway,
Wow,
you fit really well with the brand. So
I think
so let's start with
both your approach and
go ahead.
mine is just so firmly rooted in a lot of unique aspects of Nebraska's political culture, which we're so fortunate to be a part of. And, Nebraskans demand that we do things a little bit differently here, taking that strong nonpartisan approach that we focus on policy, not personalities or partisanship. And I think that's really infused with our politics in Nebraska and our political culture. And it doesn't mean that we don't have strong ideas or passionate beliefs or feelings about issues that are important to us. But just like all Nebraskans, we can sort those out at the kitchen table or the boardroom or the coffee shop. And still end up having a cup of coffee together, or even if we have to agree to disagree, figuring out how we can work together on the next project.
Yeah, Yeah, no, that's true. Well, and so just last week, speaking of friends of the pod, Ryan Horn, political consultant from Omaha and now Washington, D.C., he's relocated and has an office in
He's gone
Washington now. We
national.
talked about the presidential. He's gone national. And we talked about the presidential debate. And of course, one of the headlines coming out of the presidential debate last week was this. Anyway, I want to talk about and get your opinion on the danger of political rhetoric. And again, as you know, I've been around this game for a few years, and I've been in plenty of fights, political fights, and I've been, I've put it out, and I've given, and I've taken as far as representing my clients and other people in the political sphere. But it's gotten to a point where this political rhetoric has now become dangerous. And two cases in point, the example that former President Trump used in that debate about immigrants eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio, turns out it was not true. Turns out it was very dangerous. It caused schools to be closed and bomb threats. And now, just over the weekend, one of the most horrific uh, opportunities of violence in our culture happened again, which apparently another attempted assassination attempt on former President Trump. So, just wanted to get your take, not necessarily on those specific issues or incidents, but just this whole danger of elevated political rhetoric in our culture.
Yeah, well, gosh, that's a huge topic. And I know as a through line for your approach on your shows and this podcast, and kind of lifting up not only the great stories to tell and thoughtful people to tell them, but really pushing back against that really highly pitched kind of political rancor that of course, has always infused our politics to a certain degree, but that is particularly pronounced at this moment that we find ourselves in. And, I had an opportunity to be a part of a public symposium at the University of Nebraska College of Law late last week, where we were talking about building or rebuilding trust in democracy and how to do that and why that's important, and kind of how we're all wrestling with the divisiveness and toxicity of this political moment or this more recent modern era. And there was, I think, a great deal of interest and a significant hunger in Nebraskans really across the political spectrum, and saying, yes, have passionate ideas. Yes, have big ideas. Yes, fight for those as hard as you can, but also figure out a way that we can do it, taking the temperature down a little bit, because when it's so loud and it's so hot, we can't hear each other. We can't see each other. We can't think about what the other person's saying. We can't find those areas of common ground that actually exist in many instances, where we can grab onto those and then build from there or chart a course from there. Or that just allows us simply to recognize each other's humanity. Right. And so
Yeah.
just some of those pieces, which I've talked about a lot in the last couple of years and kind of reiterated last week. But, I firmly believe that this toxicity, this rancor, this divisiveness in our politics, much of it manufactured for political gains, to divide us, to tear us apart, to get good people to throw their hands up and say, my vote doesn't count, or this is too messy and too painful and too consuming for me. So maybe I have good ideas, but I'm not interested in running for office. I really think that that level of toxicity in our public discourse is actually another form of voter suppression, much like
It
gerrymandering or
absolutely
voter
is.
ID
Yeah.
or term limits or actual voter disenfranchisement or confusion. I really think that it's another form of working to really dismantle and undermine our democracy. And so I think it's very dangerous, because it's not a legal structure, right? It's not a law that's passed or something that we can see tangibly,
Right.
but perhaps it's more pernicious because it's so pervasive and elusive. So we need to be really watchful of that, and we need to guard against that together, and, really think about this rhetoric that's coming out. There was an incredible leader from UNO who was there and had used an example on her panel about this very highly talked about moment in the recent presidential debate in regards to an anecdote President Trump shared about immigration that ended up not being
Yeah.
grounded in reality. But she was talking about how dangerous that was as an example, because what it's really about is othering people. What it's really about is
Correct.
pushing people outside of the human family and outside of the human circle to dehumanize our neighbors, which
Yep.
makes it easier to attack politically and even physically.
Yep.
And she'd be a great she'd be a great
Yeah.
guest on a future
Yeah.
podcast. But their research at UNO on domestic terrorism and counterterrorism showed how some of those strategies and tactics actually does lead to political violence. And it was very eye-opening and very illuminating. And you know me, Dan, I am the biggest cheerleader for free expression and free speech and the First Amendment
Yeah.
that's out there. So I
Yep.
definitely don't want to suggest that there should be any sort of governmental
Right.
punishment for free speech, even if
Right.
it's inaccurate or uncomfortable or pushes the boundaries. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't meet it with more speech, right? That's the right remedy, to call out inaccurate information and say, hey, that's actually not accurate. It's dehumanizing. That's not helping us solve problems. Because at the heart of that discourse was a serious issue about immigration. But now there's been a
Exactly.
deflection and a distraction against this wild claim. And people ask me sometimes, they're like, how are you able to stay friends with people in the legislature that really have different beliefs than you? And number one, I'm a people person and I love my colleagues and I admire and respect people who step forward, even if they have different political beliefs than me. But I also recognize that as firmly as I hold my convictions, as authentically as I hold my political beliefs, for the most part, the colleagues that we find ourselves in disagreement on those hot button issues, rarely is it out of cynicism, almost never. It's an
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
equal, authentic, intentional kind of process and belief why they hold those beliefs. So if I want them to
Yeah.
expect,
Yeah.
respect my point of view, I have to recognize their humanity. I have to recognize the sincerity of their position. That helps us talk through things in a different way than if you're
Yeah.
othered, or if you're canceled, or if you're not in the right tribe, this kind of tribal mentality, or you're in the wrong party, or you're from the wrong zip code. Whatever the strategy is for othering, I just think that's very, very dangerous. And it doesn't reside at one point on the political spectrum. I have also seen this, happen on the left. And
Correct.
I think that's just
Correct.
really a disservice to democracy.
Well, and it becomes, it's kind of like the frog in the kettle, right? We may not understand and recognize what some of that activity and language is doing. Um, but again, for those of us who maybe wear our hearts on our sleeves, and we can see our fellow humans reacting to this, who are people of whatever challenges in
Yeah,
life, whether it's sexual orientation or the color of
right.
our skin or our economic status, our mental capacity. There's so many people in our community that we uh, should be lifting up. and being a champion for. And instead, we maybe don't realize it right away, but this example of these Haitians in Ohio. And we can feel that here in Lincoln because we have such a rich
Yeah.
immigrant communities here in our city that we have championed and lifted up and have become such an important part of our culture here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so, when it comes to that, that rhetoric is impacting the way that they live and the worth that they have in our community,
Right.
that's when it becomes dangerous.
Yeah, I
So,
think that's right,
uh,
because it's human nature to want to be seen, to want to be heard, to want to belong, to not feel othered, right? And definitely not to be treated unfairly or disrespectfully based on who you are, right? Those core issues that go to identity, right? And that's really, I think, what democracy is about and civil rights are about. It's about ensuring that we do have equality of opportunity in this society. It's about ensuring that people are judged on the content of their ideas and the strength of their work ethic, and are not prejudged or pushed aside based on the color of their skin or their gender or who they love or where they hail
no,
from. And, we've seen a lot of dark chapters in America's history where there's really this fomented distrust and suspicion, around whether it's Japanese internment, whether it's around Red Scare, whether it's around, the persecution of Catholics or even Germans during
yep,
the
yep,
Great Wars. And that has, real resonance right here in Nebraska. And so, when we think back about some of these examples at those really, really tumultuous periods in our politics, we're feeling some of those similar kind of ripples today. And so I think that's why that wild claim was, quickly um, rebuffed. But I think that people are really, really struggling to continue to unpack like why that is exactly so dangerous. It's not like, oh, well, a candidate said something kind of crazy or bent the truth or
yeah.
whatever.
And there's a
That
lot of
happens in
memes, and people are
politics, but
laughing about.
right,
Yeah, yeah,
right, right,
yeah.
right. So
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. It's so important to keep vigilant about that. Well, and we're visiting with State Senator Danielle Conrad here on the Dan Parsons Show. Delighted, Senator, that you could join us here for a few minutes. Let's talk about some Nebraska politics. Obviously, it's a big election year in
so much to
Nebraska.
talk
Uh,
about.
Oh my goodness. Half of your colleagues are up for election, half of the seats in the legislature are up for election. We have two, in I think maybe for the first time in history, two United States
Right,
Senate
right,
tickets on the ballot, plus our three congressional seats, plus school board and state school board
right.
and other offices, plus the third house of the Nebraska political system, which is often referred to as the people and ballot initiatives. And my goodness, you're going to have to do your homework,
That's
kids,
right.
before you go to the voting booth on November 5th, because we've got some ballot issues that have been placed on the ballot because people care about these issues, and they've gone out and spent money and collected signatures and gone through all of that to hopefully be on the ballot here in November. And so maybe talk a little bit about that process. I know you've been involved in some of those in the past, both probably on the legal side and on the foot traffic
Yes,
side.
yes, that's right.
But maybe talk a little bit about that process of Nebraska's cherished initiative ballot process.
Yeah, well, you know me, Dan. I am a political nerd and I love everything about campaigns and elections and governance. But one of my really most thrilling aspects of political life is having a chance to be a part of those issue campaigns that really quintessential, very, very pure democracy, right? Where people come together regardless of party for or against an issue. And these tools of direct democracy, initiative, referendum, recall, are really part of, again, our deep political culture and history in Nebraska, really ushered in as part of that populist, progressive history that sought to bestow the citizens with more power in their democracy. It was a really critical feature, and only about half of our sister states have tools of direct democracy available to them in their constitution. And
Hmm.
as not only a Politico but a civil rights leader, one thing that I think
Yep.
perhaps is missing from some of the court filings I've been busy reading, like other Nebraskans, or news stories that I've been trying to sort through in the wake of all of this litigation around the different ballot initiatives that were in Nebraska. And then decisions came down last Friday, really clearing access to the ballot for all of these hot topics so the Nebraska citizens do have a right to vote on them. Is that, right in our state constitution, it could not be more clear. And it doesn't matter what the issue is. What the law tells us, what our constitution tells us, is that the people of Nebraska who bestowed this constitution upon us reserved for themselves and gave for themselves the very first power of the people, for the people, by the people. They've reserved the power of initiative. And that's the ability to be on a co equal playing field with the legislative branch, to act as our second house, as you rightly noted. So, yes, if there are
I call it the
really,
third house.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's right.
It's
No,
the
I
second
knew what you
house. Yeah,
meant.
sorry.
Everybody knew
Third
what you
house.
meant. But, whether it's, a death penalty issue or an abortion issue or paid family leave or private school vouchers. All of these issues have been hot topics in Nebraska on the ballot in recent years, and Nebraskans really like to vote on these measures. That's why you see folks, very enthusiastically signing petitions to put more issues on the ballot. And I think that's really cool because it's a nonpartisan approach to advancing key issues. And what's really important, and I think the court got right kind of writ large here, yes, of course, sometimes there's going to be those egregious cases where something isn't done right for initiative or referendum petition, right? Every now and again, that is going to happen. But what the Constitution tells us, and the laws tell us, and the case law tells us, and our common sense tells us that we should always put our thumb on the scale in favor of giving people a right to say what they want their government to do on any given issue. And
Yep.
so as the legislature, I think perhaps in the term limits era, has become a little less responsive to the will of the citizenry, you see more and more ballot initiatives arise in Nebraska and again across the political spectrum. And you see Nebraskans going out and ushering in gaming or expanded gaming, increasing the state minimum wage, deciding to reinstitute the death penalty. The list goes on and on. But this
Hmm.
really robust, beautiful tradition of direct democracy is going to be on full display on ballots this fall. So, for folks who like to vote by mail, get out a cup of coffee, get out Google, get out the
Yeah.
Secretary of State's
Yeah.
voter pamphlet or the League of
Yeah.
Women Voters voter guide. Do your own research. But it's going to be a long ballot. We've got a ton of contested
That's a
candidate
good.
races and a ton of interesting
Yeah.
issues. That's a great thing for democracy.
It absolutely is. Well, and I know both political parties and are excited about some of those issues
Yeah,
because it'll draw more of their
that's
voters
right.
to the polls.
That's right. There's kind of the
And
substance and
again,
the
that's all good.
strategy there. The folks
Yeah.
involved with the campaign obviously want to see a certain result in our laws. Political strategists are looking at it from a lot of different angles and thinking about turnout tools and my general belief is the more interesting questions you have on the ballot, whether that's contested races or ballot initiatives, they're each speaking to different aspects of the electorate in different ways. And the net result is good. It's bringing more people into the conversation. It's generating more interest in
Absolutely.
elections. And, sometimes voters, these ballot initiatives are just so tangible. Do you think that we should criminalize Nebraskans' use of medical marijuana? That's just, you don't have to get out a lot of charts
No.
and graphs to kind of think through that,
Right.
right? You don't
Right.
need a
Yes.
hundred
Yeah.
pie charts to explain the tax plan, right? It's a pretty
Yeah.
tangible kind of issue that everybody generally is a pretty good feel for. And if not, they can go out and find some
Yeah.
more information about it. Same comes with
Yeah.
whether or not we should use public resources for private schools. These are just really bread and
Yep.
butter issues in our democracy that I think voters will be really excited to weigh in on, as evidenced by their signatures to get them on the ballot. And then we have this
Yeah.
history making moment for people who feel passionately about reproductive rights. We're going to have competing
Mm.
ballot initiatives, maybe for the first
The only one in America,
yeah, that's
right?
right, right.
Yeah.
Nebraska's making
Yeah.
history in this post-Roe, this post-Dobbs world where we've seen other ballot initiatives on abortion access and reproductive rights in recent years, but never before have we seen competing ballot initiatives in this moment, and they are really high stakes. And they can be kind of confusing. So, especially as they are paired together, so this is definitely one
Yes.
of those
Yes.
areas and issues where Nebraskans want to think really carefully and do their homework to advance what they think the right approach to abortion access is in Nebraska. And they're pretty long ballot initiatives dealing with a controversial, complicated topic. And the language can be confusing when compared to each other. So it's really important that Nebraskans take their time, get educated, and then cast their vote. And there's always kind of those strange and confusing things that come up with ballot initiatives sometimes too. And I've been talking to neighbors like this a lot, and they're like, wait a minute, a vote for is a vote against, or a vote, some of those kind of work differently with the initiative and the referendum on the ballot at the same time. So
Yep.
that's something that Nebraskans definitely
Yeah.
need to prep for as they're doing their at-home
Yeah.
ballots or going in on E-Day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we begin to wrap up, my
I
goodness,
know.
this 30 minutes, bing, it goes fast, Danielle. But as we begin to finish up, you had some time off from your day job of
Right.
being a state senator, but then you got drugged
That's
back
right.
in
That's right.
and had the longest special session in Nebraska history. Is
Second
that correct?
longest, I think. I
As
think
I
we
recall,
didn't
second
quite hit
longest.
the
Okay.
the record, but we
Okay.
were sure trying to.
So, and obviously we don't have time to go through all of that, but what are you looking to the future come January as you begin your next session? And again, you're, I think, the second longest serving state senator currently active, and so you've got a leg up on a lot of folks as far as experience. But what are you looking for from your colleagues as you get ready come January after this election of the next legislative session? We got about 4 or 5
4 or 5
minutes.
minutes. Okay, lightning
Take
round.
your
Well,
take your time.
yeah. We had a very unusual special session this summer to kind of a do-over, so to speak, for Governor Pillen's plan to address property taxes, which of course is a longstanding issue in Nebraska. And the legislature had rejected his plan just a few months earlier during the regular session, which in essence sought to increase taxes in order to provide additional revenue for additional tax relief for property owners. And anyone who thinks that nonpartisanship is dead, I direct their attention to what happened in Nebraska on this issue, where really we
Yep.
had an incredibly diverse coalition all across the state and political spectrum. Myself and other leaders on the more left hand side of the political spectrum, bringing that progressive lens, joined with our friends on the right side of the political spectrum, bringing that conservative lens. And we came to the issue perhaps for different reasons, but with the same results. I said, I'm not going to increase taxes in a regressive manner. I'm not going to increase taxes on those who can least afford it. Primarily, the folks who pay sales taxes see that disproportionate burden for seniors, low income working families, what have you. My friends on the right said, I meant it when I said it, no new taxes. So we came together in a really nonpartisan way to say that we believed that Governor Pillen's plan was misguided. And so we were able to identify a few other smaller slices where there was common ground and consensus to provide more access to existing property tax relief programs. But the essence of the governor's plan was unsuccessful, and rightfully so, because it was poor public policy. But he doesn't seem to be taking no for an answer. So perhaps third time will be the charm for Governor Pillen, as I know he plans to bring back some version of that in the 2025 session. So I anticipate these issues surrounding property taxes will continue to be a hot topic in the 2025 session. We'll be taking up a new state budget in the start of that biennial. So that's always a very important, arduous task. And then I do think that there will be some other really cool kind of sleeper issues. And let me tease one out for you. But this is then building on our work together in the legislature on things like occupational licensure reform or open government reform. We've really found a lot of sweet spots in that right-left coalition to come together and restrain government power and restore economic liberty and individual liberty for businesses and citizens. And one issue that I've got my eye on is really taking a hard look at the growth of the administrative state and figuring out how to restrain executive power when it comes to these rules and regulations, which have just really exploded in terms of burden and numerosity. And that has real impact for people's lives, public benefits, lethal injection, business innovation. The list goes on and on and on. This kind of whole
Interesting.
other area of
Interesting.
law that we don't think
Yeah.
about as much
Yeah.
as we do with the regular legislation. But there's been some really exciting developments in our sister states and recent Supreme Court decisions that say, hey, we really need to restrain this ever-growing administrative state and ensure it's transparent, ensure the citizens have an opportunity to participate, and just kind of get it off autopilot to say, are all of these rules and regulations
Yeah.
necessary? Now, some very well could be, right? But we've just let it grow a little bit too much over recent years. So I think
Right.
reform of the administrative state might actually sound really boring, but be very cool for to take up next year.
Well, and I appreciate that, Danielle. I mean, yeah, and that's another example of people reaching across the aisle. I know our dear friend, former Senator Laura
You
Ebke,
got it. Yeah.
is been a leader on that as well now in her private life.
Yeah.
But
She's so
and we'll have you
fantastic.
back.
We'll have a whole nother day where we'll talk about how great Laura Ebke is.
There you go. We'll have Laura Epke Day. Well, we'll have you back. We'll have you back. We'll have Laura on. But Senator, thank you. I mean, again, your leadership, your bipartisan approach to politics, your legal mind. I mean, I think most people know you're an attorney by practice, and it's just very much appreciated. And representing so well your constituents here in Lincoln and throughout the state of Nebraska. So thank you very much. And we'll have you back again.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Thanks to all your supporters, and hope everybody has a great fall and excited to continue the dialogue.
You bet. Well, folks, as we wrap up here, I'll just remind you to go on the socials and follow us there, and go to the danparsonsshow.com, where you can become a friend of Dan, help support the show, and get some special VIP perks, possibly like this video podcast of Senator Conrad and I. So
Then you
anyway,
can see
look
my
for that.
backyard.
It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's a lovely day in your backyard. But that's the show. Senator, thanks again. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.